we go on to the third principle of universal African nationalism or African fundamentalism, which is nationhood. All right. Again, we're going to begin with the words of the Prophet himself, as he says, nationhood is the only means by which modern civilization can completely protect itself. Independence of nationality, independence of government is the means of protecting not only the individual, but the group. Nationhood is the highest ideal of all people. In the course of African philosophy, also known as Message to the People, he goes on to say, no race is free until it has a strong nation of its own system of government and its own order of society. Never give up this idea. Never be satisfied to always live under the government of other people, because you will always be at their mercy. Visualize for yourself and for your children and generations unborn your own kings, emperors, presidents, your own government officials and administrators who look like you. In the Philosophies and Opinions of Marcus Messiah Garvey, he says, we cannot allow a continuation of the crimes against our race. As 400 million men, women and children worthy of the existence given us by the divine creator, we are determined to solve our own problems by redeeming our motherland Africa from the hands of alien exploiters, and found there a government, a nation of our own, strong enough to lend protection to the members of our race, scattered all over the world, and to compel the respect of the nations and races of the earth. So, this is the principle of self-reliance taken to its ultimate conclusion. Understanding that self-reliance as related to nation building is social, economic, and political organization. And the highest expression of that is nationhood, nation building, yes, and nation maintenance. And that is to say, if we work in all areas of people activity towards our own benefit, our conceptual ideal of nationhood will become concrete, in actual ultimate institutions and related institutions that are working on behalf of the race. And the UNIA actioned the principle of nationhood in many different ways, First and foremost, in 1920, at the International Convention of the Negro Peoples of the World, it elected a government in exile, that was to work for the total liberation of the African continent and African people around the world. Understanding that at that time, we're talking about the African continent having been recently colonized completely by European powers, all right? And so it worked towards that goal in various other ways through the government now that it had established, the government in exile that it had established and had elected leaders of, They did things like petitioning the League of Nations, for example, after Mass European War I, misnomered World War I, petitioning the Western powers for the return, of the lands that were formerly colonized by Germany and confiscated by the rest of Europe as a result of Mass European War I machinations. The UNIA and others petitioned to have those lands returned to African people. And its most definitive and sustained pursuit of nationhood, however, or the beginning stages of nationhood, was in its Liberia program, which is a video in and of itself. But just as a key point, in the year 1924, the UNIA-ACL sent a ship, with an estimated $50,000 worth of agricultural and industrial equipment, along with a team of experts who had been to Mama Africa, in this instance Liberia, prior to a number of times to canvass and create opportunities in that nation. And so they sent a team of experts and engineers to begin agricultural and economic development beginning in the nation of Liberia, and form a basis, a headquarters in Liberia, from which to spread the principle of nationhood across the African continent and across the African world. And then you also have the People's Political Party, which was started in the island of Jamaica, which among other things worked towards the federation, yes, of the Caribbean, bringing the Caribbean into a unified government in order to protect itself from the machinations of European imperialism. So these are the various different ways in which the UNIA-ACL, under the leadership of the Most Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, actioned the principle of nationhood. Incidentally, in a similar way to which people tend to reduce self-reliance to just business, people often reduce the ideal of nationhood, and in fact Garveyism in general, and they reduce the entirety of Garveyism to a phrase by the name of back to Africa. They call Garveyism the back to Africa movement. And the idea was that the essence and the fundamental goal of Garvey, Marcus Garvey himself and the UNIA-ACL, was just to transport African people back to Africa. That's what they say the Black Star Line steamship company was about, yeah? Just creating a steamship line to help Africans return and repatriate to the African continent. Repatriation is all well, good and beautiful, but that is not the essence of nationhood. That was not the fundamental purpose of the UNIA-ACL, yeah? And so we're going to challenge this and contextualize this by reading from this book, yeah? More Philosophies and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, Volume 3, and deal with what Papa Garvey calls the call to Africa. He says, there are many persons who continue in ignorance of the real meaning of the Back to Africa movement. There are many others who wickedly misinterpret and misrepresent the meaning with the idea of frustrating the movement. This also is a betrayal of black ignorance. The Back to Africa movement is a form of expression which conjures up in the mind of the ignorant and of the wicked a scene of wild haste in the demolition of homes, the breaking up of prosperous business associations, the exasperation of kinship with those not of like minds as ourselves, the mad folly of pilgrimages by land to the seaboard, embarkations for various destined ports by fleet of ships across the trackless ocean to the great continent of Africa, a land of ready-made institutions of the most advanced civilizations with social, civic, and national amenities providing adequate princely living to each and every immigrant. These are a few of the utopian ideas with which ignorance and wickedness invest the Back to Africa movement. But what is the truth of the whole matter? The Back to Africa movement is a rather simple, natural, logical, and spiritual call to Africa, a spontaneous prompting of irresistible urge has found its birth in the minds of the sons of Africa in all places of the earth in which they dwell. We do not contend that the call to Africa, viz., that her sons should arise and seek her redemption, is natural and inevitable to Africa, bereft of her children, carried into captivity and enslaved in alien lands, herself overrun by alien peoples, partitioned among them, and her sons enslaved, reduced, and degraded in her own soil. 3 long centuries of Negro suffering under the iniquities of the slave trade. 300 years of unparalleled horrors reaching down to the atrocities of the Belgian Congo, and still intolerable conditions prevailing to this very moment could not but move the heaven of justice to vindicate her cause. Slowly and surely, the arm of omnipotence has been outstretched to bring justice to the Negro. His is now passing through the Red Sea wall. His day of victory is at hand. So we see Papa Garvey himself dispelling this idea that we're going to just go back to Africa and live, in a ready-made haven. We're dispelling that myth. First of all, the call to Africa is not just physical but spiritual. It's a state of mind as well as a physical process. And secondly, the call to Africa is a call of duty. It's a call to do work. It's not a call to go to Africa, put up your foot, yeah, and live, yeah, in the tropical sun and drink coconut water on a daily basis, yeah. This requires work, right? The conditions of our people at home and abroad require us to put our shoulders to the wheel. So when we go to Africa, we're going to nation build. The ideal of nationhood requires nation building, and that requires us to face and confront certain challenges, yeah? So that's Papa Garvey contextualizing the call to Africa within the principle of nationhood and the Back to Africa movement. I do hope that is clear, because this issue is causing a lot of confusion deliberately by forces who are deliberately confusing the thing in today's time.